There we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is Jeff Fritz, and today is November 23rd, 2020. This is session 12 of C# with CSharpFritz. Check it out. It's all sunny outside. It's the week before, it's the week of American Thanksgiving here in the States, and things are looking good. We're doing well here. This is going to be the last episode in this season of C# with CSharpFritz. We're going to move into another topic starting next week. Today we're going to talk about getting data from a database, interacting with a database using EntityFramework Core. Next week we're going to start into ASP.NET Core as voted on by you out there, the folks that have been watching, participating. We had a poll that was set up on our GitHub, and folks voted on the various topics that they wanted to see us work on next. We're going to work on ASP.NET Core starting next week, right here, going through all the basics from basics to advanced. We're going to talk about building websites with ASP.NET Core. Enough about next week. Today, we're talking about working with the database using EntityFramework Core to tap in and do those standard CRUD operations, right? CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. That's what we're going to be doing today. I've got some sample code written for us. I've got a README that I've built that, depending on where we go, I'll finish writing a little bit later today, and we'll attach that to this episode. And of course, if you're watching the YouTube recording, you can find links to everything just below in the description. If you're over there watching us on Twitch, if you're watching live, the GitHub link is right here coming into chat. There you go. So you can go through and you can see all of the Jupyter notebooks that we've built to introduce C# and some of the source code that we've written with Visual Studio Code and C# right at the command line to introduce some of the topics that we've been working with. How we doing there, chat room? Let me say hello to the chat room. There they are over there. So good to see you. Shy Sharp is here. Jonas RC86. Hello to you. Spectari, hello. You have 3 streams going and Spotify. That's impressive. That's a whole lot of attention you got going on there. Kudos to you. Captain Ted, hello. Krabos 2, hello to you. Taka102. Justin Horner, how's it going? Good to see you. Whitlock is here. Landlubber. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, friends, for dropping in, for stopping by and tuning in live right there. And of course, if you want to tune in live, if you want to participate, have your questions answered as we're going along, tune in every Monday. It's morning for me here in the States, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 6 a.m. Pacific, 1400 UTC while we're here in the winter hours, right? We're not on daylight savings time. When we get on to daylight savings time, it turns into 1300 UTC and all the weirdness that happens with time zones and things at that point. So, yeah, that's what's going on there. Come on, camera, what are you doing not focusing here? Let's go. Get with the program. Let me head over to the code. Let me show you where we are, what we're going to be working on, and get some music playing. Get all that stuff going on here. Let me head over there. Here we go. And we'll get some, right, where is it? It's right there. There it is. There's our GitHub repository that we've been working in. You can head out there. You just saw the link in chat. If you're watching the video, like I said, it's just down below. It's linked. You can head out here. It's github.com CSharpFritz / C# with CSharpFritz. All of our Jupyter notebooks are in here. There's source code for all the samples that we've been building. And this is where we're collaborating. This is where we're tinkering and learning together about all of these topics. This is a very beginner-friendly, discussion-focused session. This is not reference material for folks to go through. This is really more of that discussion, and hopefully there's some clips that you'll find useful from what we're doing here. If you want to create clips on Twitch, share those that isolate and show some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. We're also going to have links in the video below to all the questions that are asked along the way throughout the session. You're welcome to head out to this repository, create an issue if there's a topic you want to make sure that I cover. You can see the planned schedule of sessions. I don't have the next the ASP.NET Core sessions defined yet, but you could see I don't have any more sessions left in my October-November sessions. This is it. Entity Framework. This is the last one. But the next set of sessions that we're going to be delivering, you'll find here in the future sessions. There's ideas, different topics that we're going to cover, and I'm going to start to dial in here the ASP.NET Core topics. So you'll see those appearing and getting scheduled, lining up under planning, and as we complete them, they're going to move into the done column here. So I have a blog post I need to put on the .NET blog about this video series and telling people all the cool stuff that we've done. Let them know that, hey, we're over here broadcasting. This is something you can tune in and learn, and hopefully have a good interaction along the way. So ASP.NET Core just barely won the vote for user interface framework. So we've had this poll out here since August. Hey, what did you want to see us move into next? So WPF had 27 votes, Windows Forms only 2. Xamarin with 28, ASP.NET Core with 59 votes, Blazor with 58. Oh, look at that. Somebody just dropped a heart on there. UWP, Avalonia, not making the cut. So we're going to do ASP.NET Core next. A .NET 5 migration, that's being covered very well by some of the other shows that are on the channel. Really, this is focused on getting beginners up to speed and getting them into the technology, preferably coming in from a greenfield, coming into a greenfield project, brand new project, starting something new, not looking at migrating from one project version to another. Let me get some music playing in the background here. This is Stream Beats by Harris Heller. This is royalty-free music that you can listen to. You can play on your streams. You can play on your YouTube. And this is his Stream Beats EDM playlist. I wanted to have something a little bit more upbeat this time. And we'll just have that lingering in the background for us to hear when the action pauses along the way here. So thank you so much, Harris. We appreciate you making this music available, copyright free, available for anybody to use, stream, restream, listen to whenever you'd like. I'm picking it up from my Spotify subscription so that we can listen and have a good time here writing code. All right. So, like I said, a little bit more peppy, a little bit more upbeat. And I hope you enjoy it in the background, like I am. All right. So today we're going to talk about database. We're going to talk about EntityFramework Core. Like I said, it's the last topic we're going to cover in this series, in this season. So let's get in. I'm going to change. I have a session 12 branch here that we'll put some edits in. We'll update a little bit along the way. But you'll see here in my sessions folder, this is all the source code for session 10 of season 1 unit test, season 1, session 11, C# 9. We talked about C# 9 updates last week, and today EF Core. And there's a README here. This is where I'm going to be starting from, and depending on where the questions lead us today, I'll fill out more of the README, and maybe I delete some, maybe I move some around. Don't know, but we'll see and update appropriately. So let's get into this. Let's talk about working with database. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code today because why not? Visual Studio Code is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, code editor right now, and a lot of people use it. I wanted to get right to brass tacks. I don't want to show some of the things that full Visual Studio 2019 puts into the mix that'll make things easier, only because I think it's more valuable for a beginner to see how the sausage is made effectively, right? See the bare minimum, how things go together and what makes this happen. So, now there's a bunch of different database providers that you can use, and they're going to vary based on what database vendor you're working with. Why did that come through? We shouldn't have heard that at all. That was a subscription over on my channel that isn't even on this scene. I don't know where it came from. Yeah, that's not even on. Aliens, right. So there are all kinds of vendors, all kinds of database providers that you may use with your application, and we're focusing on relational databases as part of this session. There are ways to interact and work with NoSQL databases like Cosmos DB, MongoDB, what have you. There's Couch, there's a bunch of them out there that you can choose and work with. But in order to make sure that this sample is portable and that you don't need to have a database installed like MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, DB2, Microsoft SQL Server, we're gonna stick with the free open source database called SQLite. And that runs inside of a little file, and it drops a file on disk, and it ends up being very portable. You can take that and run on any platform, Windows, Mac, or Linux, even the mobile platforms. You'll be able to interact and work with SQLite databases. So we want to make sure that this sample is portable and gets across some of those concepts of working with a relational database. So let's talk about what EntityFramework is, what it delivers to you, and how to get our project configured for it. So EntityFramework Core is first and foremost an object relational mapper, an ORM. Now, as an ORM, that means that you take your objects, your C# classes, here's like this class, blog post, turn it into relational data, right? You map it from this object to relational data, to a record in a database. And there's a number of ways that you can do that, but the ORM tool automatically will map one instance of this class into one record in the database. There's other configurations and tweaks that you can do to separate out and create additional records and different database tables. That's a little bit more advanced topic. I want to get through talking about doing the simple CRUD interactions and working with different relations, the primary and foreign key relationships today. I want to focus on those basics with EntityFramework Core. So if I've got a console application like this one, Sample Entity Framework was the name of this console application. I just did a .NET new console application, and it created a .NET 5 console application. I'm going to be using .NET 5 going forward. And I added in 3 package references, right? I need to instruct and tell my project, hey, you're going to use these libraries, these facilities, in order to interact with the database. So I added Microsoft Entity Framework Core, Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQLite, and Microsoft Entity Framework Core Tools. These give me all the tools, references, and access to the provider that I need in order to interact with the Entity Framework Core libraries and eventually my SQLite database. Now, there are shortcuts to not having to install all of these if you're using ASP.NET Core, if you're using some other frameworks, some other templates. These are already included for you. They're provided, and you don't have to go and add additional content. I've added some documentation into the README about how to add these packages into your project. It's quite simple. You would execute the command .NET add package Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Execute that, and it creates this package reference appropriately inside your project. You can either create it this way and it'll go out to the NuGet repository, the public .NET package repository, get that package, make sure it's the correct version, the latest version is on disk, and it drops this entry inside of your project with the appropriate version number listed. So I don't have to think about the version number here. If I just say .NET add package, it goes, finds it for me, and adds it to the project. So that's not too hard to do, to go and add those references and make them available. And you'll see the last one here, adding these tools, adds in some analyzers, adds some content, so that it will suggest different features, different ways that you can work with EntityFramework and get more out of your database library. So real easy to set up, and like I said, it comes out of the box with an ASP.NET Core project. We'll see more about that in the next season. But if you're adding this into a console application, into a Windows Forms application, a WPF application, Xamarin application, you're going to need to add these by hand. Now, once you have the packages, the libraries for EntityFramework installed, the next step is to provide a way for this class to have a portal, to have a gateway into the database. How do we get from source code to database? Now, back in the day, you'd have to create some sort of a class, some sort of a helper class. And we got into this mindset of the repository pattern. You'd build some sort of a database repository. There was a shim that lived in front of all of the arcane database commands that you would send over to create tables, interact with those tables. But I say arcane only because it's not C#. It's you have to know those things. You have to know your database technology in order to interact and use them properly. Now, because we're using the EntityFramework Object Relational Mapper, we now have something called a DB context, a database context class that you can use to interact with all of those tables easily without having to write any SQL statements. And it just manages this for you. So I see a question there in the chat room. Let me finish talking about this topic, and I'll come back to that question in just a minute. Yeah, good. So if you're going to create this database context so that you can interact and have some reference to what these blog posts are that you're going to store, we can do that by just creating a new file. I'll call mine app.db.context. And let's create a namespace here, sure. And my namespace is going to be sample EntityFramework. I'm going to create a class, app.db.context, because it's for my application and it's a database context. I want folks who consume this class to know they're working with a database context. I'm going to inherit from the DB context object, and I get a red underline that says, I don't know what this is. If I control dot, this works in all of the Visual Studios, it suggests to me, oh, do you mean EntityFramework Core? Yes, I do. And it generates a using statement for me. So now I have, right, this is the frame of the portal that I'm going to use to connect C# to my SQLite database. Let me pause for a second. I see some question in the chat room. Let me bring these up. So Nothing Else Matters has the first question here. If this was an existing .NET Core 3.1 project, is there an easy way to upgrade all of the packages? There is a try upgrade tool that's available. I don't think it will actually do the upgrade for you. What I've done for other .NET Core 3.1 projects that I want to upgrade to .NET 5, I've just gone into the CS Proj, and everywhere I see 3 dot something, I've replaced it with 5.0.0, and they've all worked properly. Another way to do it would be to go into the NuGet Package Manager inside of Visual Studio 2019, click the Updates Available tab, and it will show you all the packages that have the 5.0 update available. You can select all, update, and it will go and install all of the updates for you. So the important thing that you are going to need to make sure you do, whether it's in Visual Studio 2019, there's a drop-down box that says Target Framework, and it would say .NET Core 3.1. To convert it to .NET 5, just change it to .NET 5, and it updates this statement. So if you're in text editor or some other tool, you can update that line to .NET 5, and it'll now build for .NET 5. So it's not difficult to do, but the tooling is there to force it to update. You're then going to need to go through and do any debugging necessary to make sure that your code is still compatible with .NET 5. In my experience, updates from .NET Core 3.1 to .NET 5 have been seamless. Not a single problem. So, okay, next question here is from, is this Let Humberg? Or is it Lefumberg? I think it's Let Humberg. Will I show many-to-many relationship? I'll take a note on that, and we can get into that. See, I wanted to make sure I went in the direction that we needed here. Relational data, relationships. Let's show many-to-many if we get there. I'll try and get that into the mix. So, what extensions am I using in Visual Studio Code for C#? So I have the default C# extension installed. I have the .NET Core Test Explorer. I have C#. I can chat with Slack here. Code spell checking. CodeTour is installed, but we're not using CodeTour. Docker, docs authoring. All kinds of docs. Editor config, that's a good one to have, because it'll apply the configuration, the preferred editor configuration for you. GitHub pull requests, Jupyter Notebooks, live share. So I think those are SQL Server, To-Do Plus, YAML. Not a fan of YAML. So OmniSharp comes along for the ride with this C# extension. You can see OmniSharp is running right here. ShySharp has a question here. If you use a MVVM pattern, that's the model view model pattern, the blog post should be in the folder models, but where should the appdb context? Also in the folder models? That's where I've typically placed it. For the purposes of making sure that all of these things are visible in this sample, I'm going to have all of my classes just at the top level of the project. When you're using some of these architecture patterns, there are prescribed folders that you put things in to keep them organized and nice and neat. You don't necessarily have to use the folders, but it does make organization and locating various components a bit easier to do. But I would put it either in a models folder or a data folder. I prefer models, though. You have Visual Studio in Windows, but you don't like Visual Studio Code in Linux? To each their own. That's right, and that's part of what makes .NET and C# development now such a joy for so many people, is you can use the tools that you prefer. You prefer Visual Studio 2019 in Windows? Terrific. I know there's lots of folks that prefer Visual Studio Code on Mac. That's okay too. They've got the tools and support, and they have the same first-class experience that folks in Visual Studio have. Visual Studio has some additional tools that come along for the ride, for profiling, running tests, a bunch of other things. But it's up to you. You can use what makes you happy. You've never used Jupyter before? Is it worth looking into them? I think so. I think Jupyter Notebooks are a nice way to document and provide some running code along the way. You can check out the Jupyter Notebooks for this series by clicking the Launch Binder link inside the GitHub repository. And let me share that GitHub link again. Navigate there, scroll down, right at the top of the README, there's a Launch Binder link, and you'll be able to launch a binder. All right, that's a service that runs out there that hosts Jupyter Notebooks. It'll launch, and you'll see, I think it's 10 Jupyter Notebooks that we wrote that will show you a bunch of C# features that you can walk through and try out right there live in your browser, whether you're running Windows, Mac, Linux, your favorite tablet, your favorite phone. You can run code right there, C# code, right in the browser. Thanks so much. All right. So Binder's one thing. There's also we can also install and run code inside of a container that that Visual Studio Code runs, and I forget, it's called Code Server, Code Repository, Code Remoting. I forget what the feature is called. We're going to be using that heavily as we get into the ASP.NET Core session, because we're going to want to get those web applications running in a standard way, standard location. You'll see that when we get there next time. So I have my application DB context. Like I said, this is the frame. This is the portal that's going to connect our code over to our database. In fact, let's even, can I split this? Can I say split down? Ah, there it is. Good. So, right, I have a blog post that, there we go, that we want to store in the database. The way for me to tell the database, to tell this portal to my database that we're going to be storing blog posts, is to create a property of type DbSet, that, and it's a DbSet of type blog post, that will provide that gateway. Check it out. Let me show you. I'm going to use my property snippet here. So I'm going to store a DbSet of type blog post, right? We remember learning generics, and I'll call this posts. Done. That's all I need in order to give me a way to create a database context and now interact with my posts. The DbSet is an IEnumerable. It's a collection. It's actually more like an iList. It's kind of like a list, because I can add items to that collection of posts. I can remove items from that collection of posts. I can select and filter and sort, just like you would inside the database, against that DbSet type. Okay, so I've got this set up, so that gets me just about there, almost to being able to write the database. I need to tell EntityFramework Core how to write to the database, how to interact with the database. Where is it located, right? You've seen this probably in other frameworks. There's a connection string that you need to have that will instruct the framework, here's where to go, and here's the database provider type to interact with, to connect and work with the database. So inside of several of the other .NET frameworks, there's a little bit of bootstrapping code that you can use to automate this. I'm going to do this right here inside of a method called onConfiguring, and I'm going to create a simple connection string. Now, you would probably pull this out of a configuration provider. Maybe it's an environment variable. Maybe it's injected on your hosting provider. Maybe it's stored in a encrypted file next to your project. Maybe it's inside of a key vault service, and you're fetching it and injecting the connection string. What have you. I'm going to call this, right, it's data source equals, and I'm going to call this appdb.db. And this is the database file that I'm going to create using SQLite. We're going to write and interact with. To pass that in, and configure. Come on, there we go. Options builder is the parameter that was passed in here, right? This is the database context options. How are you configuring it? What are those configuration options that we need to know in order to interact with the database? I'm going to tell it use SQLite, and that method was available because I installed the SQLite package, and I have to give it a connection string. Done. Okay, so now it knows how to connect to this hard-coded database, which might make sense if you're building a little console application, and start working with some posts inside that database, inside that AppDB. I'm going to start up. I have a database browser for SQLite. Let me get this started. I'm not going to install the new one just yet. And I'll bring that tool up when we're ready to look at the actual contents of the database. So this is all I need inside my code to tell C#, to tell .NET, here's how to go and connect to the database. Here's where the database is. Here's the database provider. And here's the content that I expect. I expect there to be a table called posts. Okay. Now is when some of the magic starts to happen. We're going to instruct .NET that there was a change in our mapping from C# to the database. There's something new here. We don't even have a database yet. We've created, here's the entries, a blog post that we want to define that we want to live inside the database, right? We're writing our code first. This technique is called code first, and we're going to generate the database based on the code that we've written. Now, there is another approach called data first, where you may have an existing database out there and you want to generate the code from the database. More on that a little bit later, but I want to show you how to do code first. Yeah, that's right. Yes, these are Gunner glasses that I'm wearing. These are Gunner Lightning 360s, I think they call them. Lightning Bolt 360s. So I'm a big fan of Gunners. I've been wearing them for years and years, but recently I've been wearing them more and more that help with my eyes, with how much we're all sitting in front of screens these days. During pandemic, it's definitely helped me. So if you head over to my channel, there's a link there and a coupon code you can click through, and you can get, I think it's 10% off if you buy a pair, if you're interested in buying a pair of Gunners. So there are tools that you can use. I don't like how that wraps. Let me head back over to here. We can just work right at the console, and man, that's going to wrap too, because I've got such a long folder name. Huh. All right. I wish I was just on another line there for my prompt. No matter. You'll need the EntityFramework tools installed, and let me make sure I have the latest version. So there's at the command line, there's a noun you can pass into the .NET command line called tool. And this will let you install and manage tools that extend your .NET experience. What's that mean? It means add on things so you can work with database, work with file watchers to trigger and rerun things if you'd like, work with SQL cache, user secrets, manage the development certificates that are installed with .NET Core. I can execute .NET tool list, and it'll show me all the tools that are installed in the local folder. There's nothing here. I can pass a -- global flag, and it'll show me here's all the .NET tools that I have installed. And you'll see I don't have too many 5.0 versions here, but there's .NET EF 3.15. Now, I would normally, if you didn't have this already installed, I'd say .NET tool install .NET EF, and it would install global, and it would grab the latest version of the EntityFramework command line tools, make them available for you. but I've already got it installed. I need to update. So I'm just going to change my verb here from install to update. .NET tool update .NET EF global. And this will go and update to the 5.0 version. There we go, from 3.15 to 5.0. Now, this will let me connect to the database, generate some code, either to update the database and give it some of the information about the new code that I've created, apply those updates, change the schema, the shape of my database appropriately to reflect the updates that are in my code, or the other way around, look at the database and update my code appropriately based on the state of the database. I'm going code first, so I'm going to generate my database, my tables, and my schema out there. And we do that with a practice called migrations. So the migration defines, here are the changes since the last time we've updated the database. It's a unit of change to be applied to the database. And we define those changes, we generate them by executing the .NET EF tool. There it is right here. Migrations is the noun that we specify. Let me see, can I just, that's not bad. Clear. .NET EF migrations, and the next, and see it's wrapping because of how long my folder name is there. I'm going to add a migration, and let's call this add blog post. So this is a name that I can give so that I can remember, here's the features that we were applying with this change to the database. So this will build my project and generate a little bit of code that will maintain the state of the database. There we go, build started, build succeeded, done. Okay, it's so verbose. You can pass in a verbosity flag so you can see a little bit more about what it created. But I'm going to head back over to Visual Studio Code, and I do see a couple of questions there in chat. I'm going to come back to you in just a minute, I promise. And you can see there's now a migrations folder here. And inside this, let me open up this so you can see, there's a couple files here, right, named after the date and time UTC, when this was created. That's actually not UTC, is it? Yeah, that is UTC. And if we look at one of these, it's, no, not down there. I want to see it. No, we can close that one. We can see it's got two methods inside of here, up and down, right? So this class is named after, right, that keyword that I gave it, the name I gave it, add blog post. So it has an up method and a down method. The down method is what happens if we need to roll back this migration. We're going to drop the table named posts. Posts is the name of that method, that property. Okay. Up is going to create the posts table. So create table named posts, and here's the columns: ID, title, published UTC, and content. If we look at my blog post, ID, title, published UTC, and content, all of the properties are represented as columns in the table with appropriate fields to go with them. Integer, text, appropriate field types, integer, text. The date time is cast as text because there is no date time type in SQLite. And my content is text as well. Now, look at this. It generated a constraint for me. It defined automatically a primary key, a unique identifier for my posts table, because I happen to have a field, a property called ID. If you have a property named ID or named whatever the type of your class is, ID, right? Blog post ID. EntityFramework is smart enough to recognize that that's something that is a unique identifier and will automatically generate this table primary key constraint for you. Cool. That's really great to see that it's smart and it will generate this information along the way. Now, we have a migration generated. We're going to see how to apply that and actually work with the database here. in a moment. Vidal asks, do I have any content to learn EntityFramework Core? You're in the right place. That's what we're doing today. What's the name of that console? That was Windows console that I was using. And customized, you can find my customization over in my, it's not my .files repository. It's over in github.com CSharpFritz. You'll see over there a bit about that. Let me see. Black Eye has a question here. Let me grab that. There's some great content. If you just want to go through training materials and you don't want any discussion, you can certainly head over to .net and click the Learn tab, and it'll drop you right in. There's all kinds of material for learning C#, learning .net, Xamarin, ASP.NET, Blazor. Great material there you can find, as well as Pluralsight, Wintellect Now, bunch of places on the net you can find that. So let me queue up a couple of these questions. Did they rename it from Windows Terminal? No, it's Windows Terminal that I'm using. That's Windows Terminal. I'm using PowerShell on here, and I've set a background, and I've installed PoshGit to customize that further. So, okay. Let me answer some of the questions that have come in here. Black Eye asks, when would you go for a code first versus a database first approach? So, you've seen I've generated some instructions for building my database, and we're going to generate my database in just a second here. I would choose to go database first if I already had a database, if it was already being used for other applications. Maybe you have a data warehouse hanging out there, a reporting database that you need to connect into and interact with, then I would do database first because it already exists. Otherwise, I prefer to do code first because as a C# developer, I can think in my familiar surroundings of C#, and it will automatically generate all of the appropriate things for me so that I have a good database experience. Then I can hand over my database configuration to a database administrator who can further tune that, and we can make sure that all of our code lines up and works properly at that point. So, lots of options for how you interact with this. But starting code first, I think, is a great way to go for a greenfield application, a new application that doesn't have an existing database. And then work with a database administrator to tune your interactions further once you start deploying. I see a question there from, is it Kademel? I'll queue that up here. Another question from Black Eye is, what about the complexity of an existing database? Would it be okay to try and do a first load with database first, but continue with code first? Sure. Entity framework diagrams aren't a thing anymore. That is no longer a thing. You won't see that in Visual Studio or anywhere. They do not generate diagrams anymore. And you won't be edited. There is no XML to edit. Everything that you interact with in EntityFramework Core is right here in the DB context. There is no... In older versions of EntityFramework, there was an EDMX file, I believe it was, that was floating around that had the diagram so you could see exactly what this looks like. That isn't a thing anymore. So... Kademel has a question here. Let's say you have a massive application with a lot of classes, and thus tables. Is there a way to tell EntityFramework Core to point to a specific namespace to pull all your entities and create DB sets dynamically? No. You're trying to generate your, right, the DB context class. No. That's something that you need to build on your own. You can create many different database contexts if appropriate for your application. Maybe there's different what do they call it in DDD? there's different perspectives on your data. That's not the right term, but I'm going to work with it. And right, the accounting group sees the data in this way. So maybe you have an accounting database context, and maybe you have a warehousing database context that talks about all the things about managing stock levels in the warehouse, right? Those types of things. Bounded context. Thank you. Yes. Draziak, appreciate that. That's the term I was thinking of. Mario coins to you. Congratulations. If you collect 100 of them, you'll get one up. Let me see here. There's a couple other questions coming in. Let me make sure. I'm going to queue up just a couple of these real quick. If the database admin decides to alter the tables, maybe for performance tuning, will that not break the code? If they're altering the tables, if they're tuning the tables, it won't necessarily break your code. If they're creating indexes, if they're creating views on top of them for you to interact with, that won't necessarily break the code. If they changed the data types, it may break your code, at which point you can regenerate those contexts, those mappings using and I need to show you, there's another .NET EF command that you can execute. .NET EF DB context that you can execute, and it will let you scaffold a DB context and entity types for the database. So if your database administrator is tuning and tweaking, you can run with the scaffold command. It will generate all of the objects that you need, and you can merge those into your C# code. Your database administrator shouldn't be dramatically changing data types in production on the fly like that. That's not something that you would normally see. Nick asks, so the database first in the new EntityFramework Core will generate the classes. Yes, it generates your database context and it generates your classes appropriately for you. So the entire mapping, you need to put your connection string somewhere in your code so that it knows how to load. So is this Sequoia asking, what's the best way to secure API keys in a WPF app, in a client-side app? Well, you need to fetch them somewhere. Embedding them in your C# code isn't going to work. So you're going to need to have them protected somewhere. Data protection services is one way to do it. You're going to need to fetch them and make them available somehow. I mean, API keys are going to be folks are going to be able to find them one way or another. So be ready to invalidate them. A secrets app like Azure Key Vault, that works as well, but something going into a WPF application, you're interacting with a Twitter where you have an API key, or a Facebook where you have an API key, you're going to need to put that somewhere where you can fetch it securely, and if they're able to look at memory, they're going to be able to see it sitting there. So for WPF, you're already trusting people to use your application, so there's a level of trust that you're passing along to them. No, I would not use variables environment for WPF. No. I'd even be tempted to stand up a web service that would provide a gateway to your other APIs that you need to interact with, and that web service use Windows authentication so that you know the person using the WPF app, they're authenticated into the web service, and that is doing the proxying to your third-party service. No, we're not talking about just talking about that question about WPF. No, there is no way to generate a diagram. So we're doing basic CRUD today. Don't want to get too far into it. Okay. So we've created, right? We've created this, this migration. How do we actually apply it to a database? And in the case of SQLite, I'd like to have a database file here that I can work with. .NET EF has a tool for you called database. So .NET EF database, we're going to use the database noun, and we apply a verb, a command. We can drop the database, we can update the database to a specific migration, or if you don't provide an additional argument after update, it'll update to the latest migration that you have. So I've only got one, so I can say .NET EF database update, and it will take those migrations that haven't been applied, and since I don't have a database, it'll go and create that. Builds my application because it needs to grab those latest migrations that we generated, get them into as real code. Build succeeded, and now it executes that migration, and we get the ever helpful done statement. Let me do that again. .NET EF database drop. Go away. I don't want to see that anymore. Building. Yes. I do want to drop it. Thank you. So, right, there was an app DB here on disk. Sorry, I wiped it. So let's do .NET EF database update, and let's pass in a verbosity. Let's tell it to be a little bit more verbose. Okay, and it's going to tell me all the things it's doing along the way here, just in case you want to know. Maybe you've got a database administrator, you've got somebody that wants to know a little bit more about what's it actually doing, and you can see exactly what it applied. Check it out. When it, right, so when it, come here you, builds, right, it built the application, no errors. Build succeeded, .NET exec, and it's going through and getting ready to build my database, right? Creating database command for execute non-query, and it actually wrote the database out here. I'm looking for it. There it is. Open connection for database main on server, and look, there it is, appdb.db. Okay. And it created a table, because it didn't exist yet, called EF Migrations History. This is where the database tracks what version of the migrations have been applied. And, yes, executed it, and it put a primary key on it. Another constraint, make sure that the product version is not null. Product version is .NET 5 in our case. And then it applied the actual migration. Apply migration. So, right, here's where it inserted, and oh, actually it didn't insert, it just said there's nothing there. So it created the table posts, because that's what this said to do. We saw create table posts, and it applies the constraints, right, appropriately for us here. Executing, and it inserts into the migration history, so it knows there's the file name for that migration it applied, and it was using EF Core 5. Right, so now we know that migration has been applied, and because the migration is named after the date to start with, we know that they'll be applied in the appropriate order because they're ordered by date. Looking here, trying to catch up. Okay, so now if I take a look on disk, there's appdb.db, and it's allocated 20K for it. I'm going to go over here. I have a database browser for SQLite. You can also You can also run a database browser inside of Visual Studio Code. I'm running this one so it's outside and a little bit easier to pick up and see what's going on. So sessions, EF Core, sample entity framework, there it is, AppDB. So there's my tables that I have, posts, EF migrations history, and if we look at posts, it has an ID, a title, published UTC, and content, just like we expected. It's all there for us. Okay. We've got a database we can work with. Let's get into actually writing and working with that data. So we've got migrations. Let's write a blog post. Let's put a blog post out there for us to work with. So we create a new database context, new AppDB context, real easy. Kind of makes sense. As that's being instantiated and it gets configured for us to work with, it'll execute this method. So we get it all configured. It knows how to interact with that SQLite database. And we can start to get data, write data, all that stuff. So I'm going to start with a method called getPosts. Real simple. I'm going to pass in my database context. And I mentioned the posts property behaves like an iList, like a collection that you can modify. So I'm going to first call the AsNoTracking method on this, right? That says we don't need to watch any changes. We're only reading the database. Otherwise, as we interact with data in the posts collection, EntityFramework will see those changes, track them, store them in memory, and we can save those changes back. We'll do more with that in the update segment here in a second. So, get that list of posts, right? It returns an iQueryable of posts, right? An iQueryable is just a collection that we can query through. It turns into SQL for us when we actually enumerate it, when we actually start to look at the data inside of it. So if there aren't any posts, write no blog posts found and exit. Nothing more to do here. If there are posts, for each record in the posts collection, just write out post to string. And I put a little dummy helper method in here to string and now put title with the ID of the post. So if I run this now, right? Not dit. .NET run. This is just a console application, and I'm in the wrong folder. That folder. .NET run. Dank Scooter, your spoiler alert. That's something I can absolutely show you here in just a second. There we go. No blog posts found. There's nothing in the database. It connected into the database, queried the records, didn't find any, and told me no blog posts found. So let's add a blog post. Let's write our first post to add to our database. So we're going to be passed that same database context, and I'm just going to create a new blog post object. Title, my first post. Published UTC is now. Content, this is my first post. I'm very proud of it. So I was mentioning, it's an interaction. We can interact with that posts collection with things like add, right? Check this out. If I'm going to do a control space here, look at all the methods that you can execute and interact with that collection, right? It's a link collection that you can work with. Count, sure. Find first. From SQL, you can actually have it execute some SQL commands directly if you'd like. Join into other tables, sure. Min, max, right? The aggregate arguments, the aggregate methods you may want to interact with. Single, I just want one record out of this. Skip a certain number of records. Take a certain number of records from the collection. To array, to dictionary, to list. Update, where, there's your conditions if you want to add those. So very clearly, right, from a C# developer's point of view, It speaks my language. I know how to do those things. So now that I've added this, I'm going to move actually my getPosts method below addPost, and I'll rerun my code, which will now add that post and go get the list of posts. There we go. My first post, and it's ID 1. Now I didn't set an ID, and the ID here doesn't have any indicator that says, well, this should be value 1. Here's the thing. If you have a column called ID, by convention, it will set it up to auto increment. It will automatically start counting that for you. You don't have to set a value there. It'll set it for you. And when you look at the data afterwards, you'll see the value that EntityFramework created for you. So, nice, easy way for you to interact and learn. Right, not learn, but generate these values for you, where I don't care what it is. Just go create my post in the database. Now there's a couple different ways that you can interact and see the SQL that's being executed. Now, I wrote it in my notes over here. Yes, toQueryString and log2, that's right. So when I was, I don't want to add that post again, so I'm going to comment that out. In my getPosts method here, right? So here's my query. I can actually, and this is an IQueryable still. It hasn't been cast to a collection yet. It hasn't been evaluated yet. I can get the query that's going to be written out here. I could say console write line posts, right, to query string, and this will give you this will give you, there you go, generates a string representation of the query used, right? It may be okay to execute directly, but for debugging, you'll be able to see exactly what it is executing. So if I add that, no, I didn't want to go back there. I wanted to go here and run the application again. So it's going to do the fetch, but it's also going to output, well, here's my query string. There, select ID, content, published. And if you're familiar with SQL, that looks pretty standard. Sure. Right? If I put a little bit more information on here, right, and I said, fingers don't fail me now. Here we go. Where p.id is less than 10, right? Do a little bit extra in my query there. Run it again, and now, there you go. It generates my where statement appropriately for me, right? And we're still very basic. We're at the very beginnings of this, but dang scooter, that's one way that you can see the SQL that's being generated. Another way to do this is inside your DB context. There it is, right there. When this is being created here, I believe this was just added with EntityFramework Core 5. There it is, log2, and I can specify how do you want this logged. It's going to log information. Where would you like it? So console write line. I need a control dot there. Give me my using statement. So just write it out. You could tell it, put it into some sort of a log location. And I'm going to tell it log level. Give me everything. Give me all the information. So now, for every command that's being executed, it's going to write out, here's the code that I generated. So .NET run. There we go. So you see it logging here. Look. Right. Initialized appdb context using provider SQLite with no options. To execute db command here, right? Because I did. It first checks to see, well, do I get any records with this? Right, select one, don't actually retrieve any data. Do I get anything back? Because that executes extremely quickly. Right, 10 milliseconds. Okay, now go and do the select, and here's the data to populate. So now I've got some interaction. Now I can pass that off to a database administrator or someone, and they can see exactly what's going on and tune a little bit more appropriately. So that's the log2 method that you can add into your options to get it to log these values for you as it's interacting. So AsNoTracking, there's a question there. And let's talk about that as I do the update next. The update interaction. I need to read that a little bit closer. Is that Ismail Malachi? Let me get back to your question here in a second. This leads right into our next discussion here. I'm going to turn off the log2, but leave that in the code as a reference. What is AsNoTracking? So when I was interacting over here, AsNoTracking says this is a read-only interaction. Don't track any changes to the objects because I don't plan to make any changes, and if I do, I'll tell you what the changes are. So if I'm going to update a post in the database, right? Update posts, I can say, well, go find this post. I turned off AsNoTracking. Go find that post because I'm going to modify it, and I've updated the title. I hacked your post. And go save those changes. Database, save changes, right? Persist those changes back out to the database. So because I turned on the tracking, let me, so that you can see what's happening. You know what? I'm going to turn back on log2. Let me turn that back on so you can see this. Right? So now let me run this. And you'll see that, right? I hacked your post. It has a new title, and we can even go look in the database. And if we open up and browse the posts, there you see title is, you're not going to let me, you're not going to zoom here, are you? No, it doesn't have a zoom. Rats. The title is changed. Okay, I get it. When you look at what's happened here, right? Select, it went and fetched my data just as I requested. Limit 1 because I told it first, right? So it only gives me 1. We made our changes and it executed here, database command, passing in some text, and it's got some parameters to set. The title, because we updated the title, there's parameter for the title is P0, right? That's, where is it? Where's that set? Execute db command. That's the select. I don't see the parameter being set. And P1 is the ID of that, the key, and updates it and selects the changes to make sure that it did appropriately change, and it returns to me, here's the object, because I said get posts. There it is, and there's the results. So save changes, you don't have to identify, you don't have to remember, here's the things that have changed inside my database. EntityFramework will do that for you while you're connected. Now, if you get disconnected from your database, like in the case of a web application, where you send down some data, that data comes back to you, and you need to now reattach an object, track those changes that you're applying, and save them. That's a little bit different, right? You now at that point need to reattach. The method is attach, so that you create a new object, attach it, or you select out the existing object so that you get that copy update it with the changes that were made by your visitors, and pass it back. The other thing that you may see here is you can't do SQL injection with this. All of the appropriate guardrails are in place here that you can't inject SQL with EntityFramework Core. I can't change my title to right. I can't change my title to right. If I go through and I try and do that, right, a typical SQL injection type of attack, .NET run it. It updates it so that is my title. It properly escapes, and I get that returned. So you're protected now from those types of attacks on your application. Ismail asks, regarding SQL raw queries, the alternative method entity has no key to view for ignoring entity seems to not be working. That's a question for the Entity Framework team. You're a little bit further out than I want to cover today. And that would take a little bit of investigation on my part. So with respect, I'm going to pass and ask you to post a question on the GitHub issues for Entity Framework Core, or run out to the Visual Studio community website and you can create an entry there and they'll be able to help you with that. NetJam Jr. asks, can you implement IPropertyChanged on the class Entity Framework returns? Why? Why would you want that? You're the one who's updating it, and Entity Framework is returning your POCO object. You can certainly implement IPropertyNotifyChanged so that when these properties are changed, they raise an event that can be observed and behave appropriately. Sure, but they're not being changed by Entity Framework. They're being changed by your code. So, not quite the same. I think there's better ways to do what sounds like you're trying to accomplish. You don't necessarily want to be polling the database, and when an object changes, raise notification. There's ways to set up queues and notifications from the database as things happen to send out notifications using pub-sub type of architecture and broadcast and paint those updates. So that's a different concern that Entity Framework isn't going to help you with. Okay. You may want to send notifications, broadcast notifications when save changes happens on a particular object, and use that to broadcast notifications. But Entity Framework isn't going to do that for you. So, okay, we've updated records. Let's see about deleting records. Delete it's just like a collection, right? So let's take a look at this. Database posts remove, and when you want to remove an object from the collection, you have to pass it the object in the collection you want removed. So I want to remove that post that's since been hacked, and it looks like little Bobby Tables was trying to rewrite the content of. So let's go find that and remove it. We execute save changes again, and give me the list of posts. I will activate that sample now, and we'll be able to run the code, and it should wipe out the content of it. There you go. No blog posts found, and you see all my log information being output. I'm going to remove the log at this point. You're welcome to use that in your code in the future, but there's no blog posts in the database now. Fantastic, right? So right, and I can save that, go get the posts, and regenerate, and now I'll have my one post in the database. There we go. My first post, 2, because post 1 was deleted. Okay. Now, that's great. We've done simple CRUD. We've read data, created data, updated data, and we've deleted data. But there's also the question of, well, how do we get some relational data? How do we create a primary foreign key relationship? What's that look like? What's that behavior? What's that configuration? How do I do that? So let's go back over to our blog post and go away. Let's create an author, right? So let's create a public class author. Let's scoot you up a little bit here. Let's make this very simple. I'm going to use my snippets here to create an author. Authors have a name. Authors also have an ID, right? There we go. And let's give it one more property here. Twitter username. All right. Now, we want to relate authors to our posts so that we can both go from an author and see all the blog posts that they wrote, and also from our blog post, go in and see the author that wrote it, right? Because every blog post has one author. More on that later. Start simple. One author. So what I can do is inside my blog post class here is I can create a reference to that author. And this is going to feel a little bit too easy. So there's my author, and I need to actually get a reference to the author's ID and keep that here also, right? That's kind of good database practice. So no, I want an int for the author ID, and there we go. Now, the author has a bunch of blog posts. Okay, so let's create a property over here, and this is a, right, is it IEnumerable? Is that what I'm thinking? I think that's it. Or is it DbSet? I think it's IEnumerable. It might be DbSet. If only there was somewhere that I had already written the code for this and I could go back and reference and make sure, oh yeah, that's the way that I was supposed to do this. Yep, IEnumerable. I was right. Which makes it a little bit trickier to work with, but no matter. So this is an IEnumerable of blog posts, and we'll call this posts. So I've created a C# reference between these two, a relationship. An author has posts, and an author exists on a blog post. So let's move the author out into its own file. But I've now I've changed the shape of my object. I've changed the shape of my blog post. I need to create a migration. So let's create another migration. .NET EF migrations add author. And this will build and identify what that relationship should be between blog post and author, and create a migration for that. And there we go, add author. So we're going to add the author ID to the posts table, and then we're going to create a table called author with ID, name, Twitter username, with a constraint, primary key author, and it automatically creates an index for the author ID on posts, as well as a foreign key, so that it knows the relationship between these. This is good database design being delivered for you, no extra charge. It's free. Comes along for the ride. So, yeah, we're going to get into many-to-many in just a second, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. So, I've got this out here. Now I can create, let me go back to, where's program? Now I can add a post with an author. Well, actually, no, I can't. Hang on. Hold the phone. We need to update the database. What? .NET EF database update. Now, if I tried to interact with it, it would throw an ugly error for me because it doesn't know what the authors table is yet. Oh, look at this. Oh my gosh. What happened? I broke something. This worked properly earlier today. Isn't that always the way? Applying migration, blah, 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 blah. ID, author ID, content. Why? What did I miss here? Go back to the code that worked. Int author ID, author. Yeah. EF temp posts. Oh, you know why? Because it's got a record there that doesn't have an author ID. So, here's what I'm going to do. .NET EF database drop. Yes. Oh, I still have it open over here. Close database. Do it again. We could make author nullable, yes. Tell you what, I'll go back and do that. Standby. Where was it? Blog post, right? I could, right? Yeah, whatever. I could make this nullable like that. Actually, if I do this and no, it's not finding system components, right? I don't think it's not null. No. Nullable author. Yeah, nullables are, they end with a suffix of a question mark. There we go. So now I should, where'd it go? Up here, nullable author, right? And if we look at this, nullable true. So, honestly, what I should do, let's do this right. .NET EF migrations, right? I should remove, and then remove again, and then regenerate. Right? And we'll re-add the author. So it's not changing my C# code, but it's removing the code to interact with the database. Right now, do .NET EF migrations add, add author. There we go. .NET EF database update. And it'll update my database. There we go. Applied the migration. So, if I go back over here and we open and we look at the database again. So, that's the author table. If I look at posts, this is my first post. There it is. Okay, so the post is there. It doesn't have an author. And that's okay. That's legit. You're allowed to do that now because I made that author ID nullable, right? With a question mark. So now let's create a record with an author. You'll notice I didn't add a DbSet for authors. You can't create and insert authors and query against authors from here. I can add that later if I'd like to, but I don't have to do that. So there it is, program. So let's add a post with an author. So here we go. Add post with an author. So we're going to create a new author. Name is Jeff Fritz. I know that guy. Twitter username CSharpFritz, and he's got a new blog post. Author equals, right? We're assigning the author to this. It's that new person that we just created. Title, live coding with Twitch. Content, today is my 3-year anniversary, live coding on Twitch. That's true. Here, November 23rd, 2020, it's my 3rd year live coding on Twitch. All I do is say posts, add that new post, and save changes, and it will both create the author record and create the blog post. Now, if I already had an existing author record out there, I could grab that author record, select it out of the database, and attach it to this blog post. Or I could set the author ID property on the blog post from that existing author that I already knew about. Maybe I selected it in a drop-down box. Or maybe it's an ID that's associated with the author that's logged into this application and writing this blog post. I can grab that ID and attach it to the record instead of attaching this object, and it would still propagate all that information. So let's run that. So yeah, thank you, Chris. 3 years here on Twitch. So thank you very much, Caparino, Kerjax, SurgeDev, PC Nerd, JB1T. Much appreciate. So, author does not contain a definition for Twitter username. Did I? I thought it was Twitter username, right? Author, what did I call it? Yeah, Twitter username. What do you mean it does? Oh, look at that. I changed the caps. Rerun that. Build and run. Here we go. Yeah, the casing. It should have picked that up here, but there we go. .NET run, and it didn't output anything. I forgot to call get posts. Let me comment that out. Do this. Save. Rerun it. And now I get live coding on Twitch and my first post. They're both output, and now we can see and interact with that data and query it a little bit, whatever you might want to do. Terrific. Okay, so now we've created multiple records. Now the next question is, well, what about many-to-many? And I wasn't sure if we were going to get down into this. I wasn't sure if this was going to be a question. I should have assumed it was going to be a question, because this is one of those sticking points that a lot of folks run into. Gosh, I'd like to know more about how to do many-to-many, right? And the typical scenario that you see people show as a demo when working with the blog engine scenario is, what if we had tags that we applied to our blog posts, right? You might have... these two, maybe they're both personal blog posts, and maybe there's Twitch blog posts, and there's technical blog posts, and all these different tags, and each post has a collection of different tags applied, but each tag can be applied to many different blog posts. So how do we do that? How do we interact with that? How do we create this many-to-many relationship? Well, when we work with any relational database, in order to create that many-to-many, you actually need, let me build a diagram here. Oh, and I'm gonna have to attach an image to this. Oh, that's gonna be fun. Let's create a, all right, so delete this, right? Right, so if I have, right, blog posts, right? Bump up that font size, right? And I want to assign tags to them, right? We're gonna have, right, tags, and we'll bump up that font size too, right? In order to make the many-to-many relationship between these, right? It's not one-to-many. It's not one blog post has many tags, and that tag only belongs to one blog post, right? This is the many-to-many relationship, which means you need some sort of a middle table that is blog post tags, right? And what you end up with is one blog post has many blog post tags, And each tag has many blog post tags. So you end up with this middle table that you need to represent, so that you end up with the one-to-many relationship on both sides of your objects and of your database interactions. So how do we do that? How do we get this set up? So let's create a I'm gonna have to write the code by hand on this. Plenty of time. We've got about 25 minutes to go here, friends. Let's do some live coding live, right? So I'm gonna go over here to blog post. Let's create a new class, public class tag, right? And a tag, well, a tag really just has some text to go with it. I could put an ID on it. Let's put an ID on it, sure. ID, right? String, and it's the name of the tag, right? And on my blog post here, I need some way to have that collection of tags. What's that look like? How do I get to it? So we create that many-to-many inner table, that join, that bridge table. So blog post tags, right? Create a property here, int, and this will be blog post ID. This is another property, and this will be tag ID. See where I'm going here? Oh, we're almost there. So, right, this can actually be a blog post, and down here, yeah, right, tag. So now up here inside my blog post, let's make sure I'm doing this right. I'm going to have an IEnumerable of blog post tags, right? And this will be blog post tags, right? And you need to know what that is. Cool. Still don't know why that's not picking up there. Yeah, don't you know what author is? Author is there. There is an author object. So it knows what this is, this knows what that is, and our tags need to have a collection of blog posts that go with them. So I'm going to set up another property, IEnumerable, blog post tags, right? Blog post tags. And now I have the two-way relationship that I can go through here. Nope, you need to create the middle class here in order to get it to go through. Is there an automatic many-to-many? I haven't gone into that. I'm looking for the docs, I don't see docs. Looking, I see plans. Why am I not seeing this in? Yeah, that should probably be iList, shouldn't it? So that it allows me to do the add. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, I don't see it. So there was a way to do this. Yeah, the old way to do it was to specify has many, but will it do it automatically now? This was the way you used to do it, and it would go and detect and find it. Did they? Yeah, blog posts. Right, can we do it just this way? Not tags, tag. And I want to be able to find those, so I'm going to let you go from a tag back. Tag, and we'll call this tags, so that I can query from the top level on a tag and go find all of its blog posts. And I haven't even done the join yet on the get. Oh, we got to show that. So, I think that's everything. Let me go back over here. .NET. Well, first off, let's .NET build. Make sure that works. While I'm going through here, there's a question from Get It Though, asking, what's the difference between a database set and an IEnumerable? IEnumerable just generically defines a forward-only collection that you can interact with. You can query it, and it only goes forward. You can't, it's also read-only. You can't interact with it. DbSet has all the interactions so that you can modify it, filter it, delete records from it, and it will appropriately propagate those back to the database when you use EF Core. So, all right, so that did run. .NET EF migrations, add tags. Let's see what that does. I haven't tried this yet, so because I'm used to using EntityFramework Core 3.1, I haven't gotten into EntityFramework 5 yet. So if I do .NET EF database update, what do I get? There we go, applied the migration. All right. So if I go back over here and we look at database structure, we'll open, there it is, right there. So it generated the blog post tag for me. Cool. Posts, tags have an ID and a name. So it's a collection. Collections are by default 0 to many. They aren't required for it. So I am clear there. I can start interacting with and adding tags to my blog posts. Now, I didn't show how to do the join, and this is an EF Core 5 feature. Like I said, previously you had to create the middle table and do the join yourself. But yeah, EF Core 5 does this for you. So I'm going to drop back over here to my program, and this time let's create tags and add to first post, right? And I'll let's also get post with I'll just update the get posts. Let's move this, leave it up there, and there we go, and we'll get the posts and now put it down here. There we go. I want to move this down to the bottom so that these are in the order that we executed them for folks that are watching the recording so they can see this. And get posts here. I'm going to add another. Let's just copy and paste this. I want to get the information about the authors on this, so I need to actually include, right, author, right? What am I missing here? Comment that out. Why isn't it bringing... I want to do a join. Include should have grabbed it for me. Right? Include. There we go. That's what it... So it's going to include the author. And there is another helper method here, then include, to attach other tables that you want to join into. So the first one is include, and then you have then includes to set up the various joins that you want to return. So let me go back to my blog post. I'm going to update the string and say written by, right? And I can say author.name. Really? You're gonna give me this nonsense? It's there. You know it's there. Alright. So add post with author, and we still have to write the create tags. Let me comment this for now. And let's make sure that no, .NET run. Make sure that it formats and shows you everything with the author there. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Ah, because there's no author, right? In the toString. So, if author equals null, right? We'll just get rid of that. If this was VI, I would have joined the lines there. Piece of cake. But it's not. Try it again. There we go. My first post, and there it's joined in, and it has the information about the author. So now we're seeing more complex queries to fetch data out. Now let's go back and do that many-to-many and show fetching, well, adding that data and then fetching it and presenting it. So I'll scroll back down, create tags and add to first post. So let's create some tags. Let's create a personal tag, new tag, right? Name equals personal, right? And let's call this tech tag, sure. New tag, name equals technical, right? These are different tags for my blog posts. And let's take db tags. I can add range and give it a collection of these. So let's add the personal tag, let's add the tech tag, and now I can save changes, but I don't necessarily want to save changes yet. Let's go grab that first blog post and assign the personal tag to it. Grab the second blog post, assign the tech tag to it, and then go and bundle up and save all the changes. So I'll say db posts, I'll use the first, right? Which will, first, no, I want to use, first is fine. First where, actually, let me do order by, yeah. Order by the ID, because I want to grab the first one. Make sure that this always works for folks that are replaying this in the future. So I've got the first post, right? Capture that. And if I say first post dot tags dot add, and I need to specify the tags to add. Well, add the personal tag. Let's grab the second post, right? And this is completely made up for the purposes of this demo. Skip the first post, grab the next one, And on this one, tags, add, it's recognizing my Twitch anniversary, so I'll add the personal tag, and I'll add the tech tag. Okay? Now I can go through and say save changes. And this will save all the changes to both the tags and the posts, all in one shot. So now I'll go back to blog post, and it's not tags null, but if tags, yeah, let's tags text, right? We'll say tags text equals, right? Tagged with, and we'll put a collection here, right? So we can say tags string.join, and let's join these with a comma, and it's going to be tags dot, oh, you're not gonna let me do this, are you? Yeah. I want to do a tags select. Give me that. And I want to grab the tag name. There we go. And we'll add the tags text on the end. Hold on. Here we go. That's a lot of code I wrote. Make sure that works. Cool. No, the cursor smooth moving, that's a feature that I turned on in VS Code. I forget, it's like smooth scroll or something, and it's in all the Visual Studio codes. Chris Jones, I'm going to pin that question. We'll come back to that in just a second. I have 5 minutes to go here. Hold on, friends. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to run. It's going to go and create those tags, load everything out there. Oh, tartar sauce. Object reference not set to an instance of an object, down on 106. First post, tags, it didn't find. All right. It should have done all of that at once, but I'll save changes. I'll do the middle save changes along the way here. You're gonna do this to me, huh? 107. Tags isn't a collection yet. So shoot, it's going to create 2 more tags for me. Over here, browse data, tags. See, there they are. Delete that record. Delete that record. Write changes. Try this again. I don't want that to be there, but here, when it's adding the tags, I want to say tags equals new. It's an I list, right? Yeah. I should initialize this, right? If I were to do it like that. Right? That should work. That should work. Right? Try it again. Let's see how we go. All right. Now it did the get first. No, it didn't pick up and show the list. Really? What do we got here? Database structure, refresh. So there's the tags, blog post tags. Yeah, that mapping. Oh, you know what? I didn't. So here's the important. I didn't include on author. If you don't include the related tables you want to fetch, it won't present them. It won't present that data. It will kind of silently ignore it because it is attempting to lazy load that information. So, not then include. Then include would be if it's jumping through the author object. I want to get tags. There we go. And I'm going to turn off the create and assign. Let's see if we can get them loaded for us and output that appropriately. Yeah, you're right, 2.8. Now you could put the new on the end there and it'll pick it up. There you go. I didn't... Where's the toString? There we go. Tags text. I didn't include tags text up here on this one because it didn't have an author. Move that down here, right? If we try it one more time, we should now get tags for all of these things so that it's jumping through. Nope, didn't pick it up. Huh. Oh. Silly me. There we go. There we go. Yeah, you need to initialize the lists. There we go. So now there's the tag for the first one, tagged with personal, and the second one. And I can go the other way, right? I can go from a tag and see the various blog posts that are associated with that if I wanted to. So. There was a... Yeah, slightly, James, you were right. There was a question here from Chris Jones. What are my thoughts on adding the repository pattern? And I need to wrap up here. What are my thoughts on using the repository pattern in conjunction with EntityFramework Core? I think there's no such thing as too much abstraction. Adding another layer of abstraction because you're using EntityFramework Core behind the scenes, you may change that later because you're going to fetch data from a different place to work with. I think that's just fine if that's something that's a possibility in the future. Otherwise, you're over-abstracting your data. Friends, that's all the time that I have for today. It's been really good to be with you. Let me head back over to the code, to the front screen here. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're about to lose Learn TV. Thanks so much for watching. All of these videos are available over on the .NET YouTube channel, where you can find the C# with CSharpFritz playlist, all the links to all the samples on the GitHub repository, issues out there for you that you can click through. All the questions that you've seen as part of the video today, they're answered and linked directly in those descriptions of those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week when we'll start talking about ASP.NET Core.